All right, just waiting for this to load. But we're going to pick up today with Galileo chapters 5 and 6. Where we left off yesterday, Galileo had he just changed jobs from teaching at the University of Pisa to the University of Padua, which he considered to be the happy years of his life. And we're going to start getting into some of his more famous inventions. Chapter 5, Looking at the Heavens. In the year 1608, a man named Hans Lippershey put two lenses inside of a tube. One lens curved outward, or convex, and one curved inward, concave. The purpose of that is the different curves on the lenses kind of help to bend and refract the light that comes in so that the telescope can either magnify, or if it's a microscope, it can enlarge, take small and make it big, or if it's, anyways, just make it look bigger. This was the first spyglass, and it enlarged things 4 times their size. It was originally sold as a toy, but Galileo saw its greater importance and set to work making his own. Eventually, Galileo improved the spyglass and made a version that could magnify objects 10 times their size. So we kind of played with the concave and convex lenses. Maybe he grinded them to be a little bit more concave or more convex and just kind of play with the strength of the magnification a little bit. So he didn't invent the first spyglass, but he did improve it to where it could magnify objects 10 times their original size. People soon renamed it the telescope. The reason why is the prefix tele means far off. So it was this type of machine or instrument that could be used to see objects that are far off and be able to see them a little more up close. He then hurried off to Venice to show his telescope to the senators there. They were very impressed, and he gave them his telescope for free. Said, hey, you can keep this. The senators then rewarded Galileo with a pay raise and a lifetime contract at the University of Padua. Galileo continued to improve his telescope even more, and by the time he was satisfied, he had created an instrument that was 20 to 30 times more powerful than the human eye. So again, he kind of kept playing with kept grinding those lenses, making them maybe thinner or thicker, having different strengths of magnification, and eventually he improved the telescope so much that it would magnify objects up to 20 or 30 times their original size. So Galileo took his new invention, the telescope, or his new improved invention, the telescope, and took his telescope to the sky. As he began stargazing, Galileo found 80 new stars in the constellation Orion alone. Previously, they'd only known of 9. So this picture on the bottom left here, let's see if I can get my little focus mouse. Here we go. Picture on the bottom left here, this is the constellation Orion. Before Galileo's telescope, they only knew of 9 stars that made up that constellation. But with his telescope, they were now able to see 80 new different stars that all kind of compose the constellation Orion. The most common part of Orion is Orion's belt, which is in the very middle down here. The belt on the soldier's body. It's those 3 stars that go straight across. But those are pretty easily seen without a telescope. So Galileo is quoted as saying, "It has pleased God to make me alone the witness to an admirable thing that has been kept hidden all these ages." He said, for some reason, God has allowed me to be the one to see these things that no one has been able to see for years. Next, Galileo studied the moon. Everyone at the time thought the moon was perfectly smooth. After all, that was what Aristotle had claimed. And as we've discussed earlier, Aristotle was kind of the great genius that no one ever dared to question. And again, he was right on many things, but there were just some things he just didn't have the technology to know any better. And if you look at the moon without a telescope, it looks like just this smooth kind of bright white ball in the night sky. However, Galileo's telescope proved differently. The surface of the moon was actually very rough, with craters, mountains, and valleys all throughout it. He even charted the changing phases of the moon, which I believe you talked about in 4th grade. The waning moon, half moon, crescent moon, full moon, gibbous moon, waxing gibbous, waning gibbous, whatever it is. All the different ones. But if you look over here, this is kind of where we get the common nursery rhyme that the moon is made of cheese, because with all those holes in it, it kind of does look like Swiss cheese or any other kind of cheese that has holes. But really, it's not actual holes. They're just craters, like deep valleys and big kind of like divots that have been made in their moon's surface, usually from asteroids or rocks and dirt kind of flying around through space. Remember, there's no wind in space, so once an indent is made on the moon's surface, it will stay that way until something else comes along and moves the dirt or dust differently. Galileo made his greatest discovery in astronomy in January of 1610. He discovered 4 moons orbiting around Jupiter. We now know that Jupiter has 67 moons, but at the time this was quite an incredible discovery. At this time, nothing new had been discovered in the solar system for over 1,500 years. In just 8 weeks, Galileo made an incredible number of space discoveries. It still stands as the most amazing series of discoveries ever made by a single astronomer. The Starry Messenger, Chapter 6. Galileo soon published all of these space discoveries in a book titled The Starry Messenger. The title described both the telescope as well as Galileo himself. The telescope was kind of like a starry messenger because obviously it relayed information from the stars to Galileo, and then Galileo could consider himself a starry messenger because after he had observed all these things, he then wrote them down, obviously, to share with the rest of the world. He wrote this book in Latin because it was the language of learned men all over Europe. Kind of what we talk about with science anyway. The book became an immediate bestseller all over Europe and made Galileo very famous. He also hoped the book would attract the wealthy Medici family to fund his studies. We mentioned in the Renaissance unit how the Medici family were very famous patrons of the Renaissance, meaning they supported arts and discoveries and inventions, and even paid for many of them to take place. And Galileo was hoping that they would kind of catch wind or hear about his book and that they would then want to fund more of his scientific studies. He even went so far in flattering the Medici family that he named the 4 moons of Jupiter after the 4 Medici brothers. However, his flattery worked, and he was soon appointed the chief mathematician and philosopher of the royal court. Now he could devote all his time to research, which is probably exactly what he wanted to do. However, his books soon began to cause an uproar. Once again, his ideas opposed or went against Aristotle's. Galileo grew impatient with these scholars that attacked him. Galileo thought Aristotle would agree with him if he were just able to look through the telescope himself. Galileo is quoted as saying, "They wish never to raise their eyes from Aristotle's pages. It's as if this great book of the universe had been written to be read by nobody but Aristotle." He's not saying that Aristotle is a dumb or stupid or an unintelligent guy. He's saying that it's almost like these people are acting like Aristotle is the only person that could ever study the heavens. But I think if Aristotle were here today, he would look through my telescope and he would agree with me. I don't think he would think that he can just say one thing and it's true forevermore. Soon, though, Galileo would make a discovery that would cause the biggest outcry yet. While studying the planet Venus, Galileo noticed that Venus goes through phases just like our moon, that there were times of the year that Venus was more lit up than at other times. He determined that the only thing that could cause this kind of change in phases of Venus would be if Venus revolved around the sun and reflected the sun's light. And if Venus was orbiting the sun, then so was the Earth. Okay, so this picture here kind of shows you a little bit of what Galileo was thinking. If the sun is here in the center, okay, if I can get my little pen here. If the sun is here, obviously in the center, then Venus, or even anything really that travels around it, then you could see how Venus might go through quote unquote phases to a viewer on Earth, right? At full, not moon, but Venus, you can see all of Venus. At gibbous, you can only see part of it because the other part of it right here is in darkness. Then you have half, then you have crescent, and so on. Now, the only way this can be happening is if the source of light is coming from the center. Okay. Now, if Venus is traveling around the sun, then that means the Earth must be as well. And again, this is a big problem because at the time, the Catholic Church, remember, taught that the Earth stood still and that everything revolved around the Earth. But now that Galileo is claiming something against the Catholic Church, That's not going to go so well for him. Caused quite an outcry. Nearly everyone agreed with Aristotle that the Earth remained still in the center of the solar system and everything else revolved around it, which is the geocentric theory, right? The beginning of that word geo is the root for Earth. So kind of Earth-centered or Earth-centric theory. However, Galileo was sure that Nicholas Copernicus was right, the scientist before him who had claimed that the sun was the center of the Earth, of the universe. He believed the sun is the center of the solar system, and all the planets, including Earth, orbit around it, which is the heliocentric theory. So, just real quickly, this will help you remember the difference. Geo, the root means Earth. So this is the Earth-centered theory. Helio, this is the root for sun. So the heliocentric is the sun-centered theory. Debate over Galileo's ideas became very heated. He decided to travel to Rome and bring his telescope with him to defend his ideas. He said, if I can just get the church officials to look through my telescope at what I'm seeing, maybe they'll agree with me. This trip was successful. An important group of scientists invited Galileo to become a member and welcomed his thoughts. Even the Catholic Church approved of his discoveries, but they did not agree with all of his conclusions. They said, look, we can see through looking through your telescope, we can see what you're talking about, but I don't think that leads to the conclusion that the sun is the center and we are revolving around it. So tomorrow, we'll continue seeing how Galileo's discoveries were leading to a little bit of problems in his life.